Greetings to everyone. Welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Boden. I'm professor of music education, doctor of musicology, and a pianist and composer. Today, I'll be trying to answer the question, what makes a good melody? This question was asked by a student of mine, Clayton Steinhardt. Clayton is currently working on an orchestral piece for choir and accompaniment. And one of the main things that he was struggling with is coming up with what he was referring to as good melodies. So before we begin, we need to make a definition, a workable definition of what is good and what is melody. We'll start with melody. Melody is the musical layer that stands out in the fabric of the musical texture that we're working. So the main layer that we have at any given moment that is usually singable and that we can recall is the melody of that part. And then good melody would be defined, and this is a very broad and arguable definition, so I'd like to see your comments down below, and you can write in the comment section what for you means good, but in this case we'll be referring to good as first, melodies that became memorable and people can recall them easily and they're catchy in a way. Melodies that have enough complexity so people don't get tired from listening to them and they get a musical connection to that. And of course, melodies that, changed a little bit the course of music history and other composers reused them and they became extremely popular. So that's going to be a little bit our workable definition of what is a good melody. But again, I'd like to hear from you in the comments down below what you think is a good melody. Now, this question was asked by other people before me, so I'll go to a couple of YouTubers. The first one is 12 Tone. 12 Tone has a very interesting YouTube channel, Music Theory, and he has a video called three tips for writing a great melody. Here's the summary of it. So what we can see is that first, 12 Tone, he is explaining the difference between leaps, skips, and steps. And he says and argues that usually melodies try to combine and find a balance between these. Leaps are understood as larger jumps than skips. So for instance, an octave leap. Right, skips would be smaller movement. And steps would be just scalar motion. So one of the rules that he is coming up with is that usually melodies try to find a balance between leaps, skips, and steps in order to find ultimate expression. Another motion that we include here is the static motion. And the thing that happens nowadays often is that many melodies, due to this rap influence and also this static singing, are based on a single note that's repeated. And repetition per se shouldn't be something bad. We shouldn't be avoiding it. But I think that it's also a nice ingredient that we can be adding to skips, leaps, and steps in order to give the diversity. Right, the next point that we can see here is the function or harmony. Mostly melodies are based on this juxtaposition of tension and release, where we're trying to build up something and then resolve it. And usually that's what resolves into the next category that we can see on the screen, which is phrases. Most melodies tend to have a question that builds up, answered, and then it's answered with a release. So we'll have something that's building up to a dominant and then resolved into the tonic. And there are multiple forms that you can perform melodies. We'll be today analyzing 10 or 11 melodies that I've cherry-picked from all across Baroque, classical, and romantic genres. And I'll be trying to see if these things apply, and also I'll provide you my own things, my own vision on what makes a good melody. So different forms means that sometimes the answer and the question is contrasting. Other times you can have two questions and an answer. Other times there can be a repetition and the theme also can remain unanswered, right? So these are kind of like the main tips that 12 Tone provides. There's another channel that I've analyzed, and It's by Zach Hady. So he has a video called How to Craft an Unforgettable Melody. Unforgettable actually is also a good relationship that we can use as a synonym for defining good in this case. So he provides specifically three characteristics. The first characteristic is the whistle factor. That means that the melody, good melody, is usually within the range of an octave and a half. You can whistle it, and the fact that we can whistle or even sing the melody, it's very important, because if the melody is unsingable, we cannot do much, and then people forget it. Now, you can also you have to have a connection or coherence within the melody. So the second point that Zach Hady says is that you need to use motive and cells to build rhythmic and melodic materials. And the clearest example is Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, where he builds the entire melody from a rhythmic cell that's three short notes and a long one, and this melodic descending movement. Right, so that's basically a good example of a melody that's based around a single cell or motive. Also, another feature that we can see here is this raising motion or direction. I think in the next video that we'll be overviewing, we can see a better explanation of that. But usually melodies have to have some direction, and usually that direction has to be upwards, so then we can have a descent and release of tension. And the last video that I'm summarizing here is the one by Inside the Score by Oskar Osicki. So the video is called What Makes Good Melody? And specifically, well, he's arguing firstly philosophically that there is no magic formula that we can all use to make a good melody. What is good for some might not work or be good for others. And also, he emphasizes some of the features that we already saw. The importance of motion and direction. We should always remember that melody connects all of the notes in a line, so it's not disconnected dots that we're seeing all across, but the melody is connecting all of them. Melodies also are important because they have something that touches the emotions, human emotions, and that is reflected in this feeling of empathy that we can see, where music is we're relating to the emotion that is transmitted in the melody. But at the same time, melodies don't necessarily always have to make us feel a negative emotion or sadness. They also can make us move and dance. And sometimes, well, it's very evident in romantic composers, melodies tend to tell a story. So they're building up expression, and that's specifically what we're seeing here in the last point. So in addition to these three videos, I've decided to ask AI. So we can go now to my browser. I have here ChatGPT 4.0 opened, and I'll be asking him what he thinks that makes a good melody. So, what makes a good melody? And here I'm getting two answers, so we'll be reading them. The first point in both actually is the same, so it's memorability and singability, being able to sing it, so it's catchy, so that kind of is correct, and it refers to what we saw before. And catchiness here, it's actually defined by repetition of motives, so that's what we saw before. Also balance and variation, that's a really good point. We need to find balance and variation. So if we have too much repetition, we can feel monotonous, and if we have more variations, it becomes to have more sense. The second point is shape and contour. So shape and contour is really that thing of motion that we were talking about. So rising and falling motion is very important, and most melodies tend to have that. And that is reflected both in the concept of balance. So you have a balance between leaps and stepwise motion. That's actually what 12th tone was saying. And also the search for climax or climactic moments, right? Emotional impact, this is like inside the score. He was saying this. Rhythmic interest, we can also find it here. Now, harmony and chord progression. Melodies have to work well with smooth chords. So this is a really good and true thing. And mostly that's based on tension and release, right? So we have this harmonic tension and then we're resolving it. Here in this point, we have this concept of rhythmic interest. And it's true that whenever we're working on melodies, a lot of the times, especially if we're new and we're starting to write them down, like in MuseScore or in Sibelius, we're writing the score, we tend to be limited by the notation. And the rhythmic materials that we do tend to be very rigid and very strict. So they are like supposed on top of a grid. And that means that whenever I'm seeing these melodies, the first thing that I'm trying to ask myself is the rhythm flexible enough? Because many times the rhythm gets stuck and we're just seeing the same cells repeating over and over again. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't do that. Beethoven does it in his Fifth Symphony, but probably the way that he's achieving it there is through other techniques that are giving interest, which is orchestration, texture, and so forth. So emotional expression is a little bit of a repetition of the same thing we had. Context and function, of course, this is important. If you're having a melody, it should be appropriate for the genre that you're working on. And if it has lyrics, same thing. And then it's actually saying that melodies have to be unique and original, right? So here he's giving us some examples of melodies, none of which we'll be analyzing today. Ode to Joy, Yesterday, and Happy Birthday. But we'll ask another AI model. We have here this newer one that's called O1 Review, which says to be using advanced reasoning. So we'll start a new chat with that and ask the same question: what makes a good melody? They'll start thinking and we'll see what it does. Of course, these things that we're seeing, these generic features are right, and they're giving us like this main background, but they're very general and they're missing a lot of the important things that happen in good melodies. And that's what we'll be trying to analyze today. So the first thing that we can see here is that says memorability and simplicity. That's something we already said. Emotional expression, shape and contour, rhythmic interest, repetition and variation, harmonic compatibility, phrase structure, uniqueness, cultural and stylistic appropriateness, dynamic movement. So we didn't talk much about dynamics, but that's true. Melodies, usually good melodies, have some dynamic logic that kind of enhances the phrasing. And also here you have technical playability for instrumental music. Well, that makes sense. I mean, if you can't play the melody, it's not a good one. And then development and evolution, right? This also could be expressed in a better way as the overall overview of structure and logic in the piece. So, all right, that was pretty much the foundation from where we began. And what we'll try to do now is... So what we'll try to do now, right? So what we'll try to do now is to look at different melodies. So the first thing that I have here is this Gavotte and Rondeau. And we'll try to see what makes this melody good, or why is this melody so memorable and great. I'll first play it, and then we'll begin with the analysis. And probably many of the things that we'll be commenting here weren't mentioned or weren't explicitly stated in the list that we were seeing. So this is the beginning. Right, I think it's a great example of a very balanced and beautiful melody. Actually, Bach is copying and pasting this melody several times across the piece because it's a gavotte, but it's also a rondeau, which allows him to play it here and a couple more times. So let's break it down. The first thing that no one is talking, and it will appear in all memorable melodies, and I want you to challenge me and find a good melody that doesn't do that, is that good melodies are based around an arpeggio. And this is a little bit the idea that we can find in Schenker when he was doing his Schenkerian analysis, which consists of a melodic reduction where we're finding the main notes or the main points in a given melody. Now, in this case, you might be saying, well, where is the arpeggio? The arpeggio is clearly the tonic, it's E major, but I'm not talking about that one. I'm talking about the one that we can find in the melody. And it's a large scale arpeggio. So if we look at this G sharp, probably I'll be giving it a line so we can use here a green one. So here we have this G sharp, this B, and this E. That actually facilitates two things. On the one hand, by doing this, we are getting clearly direction and motion, right? So with this approach, we're hearing all of the three notes in the arpeggio, but at the same time, and actually this B could be this higher B. At the same time, this is something that mostly melodies, good melodies, memorable melodies have. They're based around arpeggios. If you recall the sonata we've analyzed by Beethoven, of course, that's just an arpeggio. Right, we have it there. Mozart's Eine kleine Nachtmusik is also an arpeggio, right? But not always melodies are this straightforward arpeggio that we can recall, but we can have this hidden arpeggio. And in the case of Bach, usually it's a more distended version of it. It's more extended. In this case, we have this G sharp, B, B, and E. That gives us a solid foundation for the melody. But the second ingredient that we didn't see in none of those videos, and we didn't even see it in ChatGPT when we were asking him, is the aspect of breathing. Of course, we were talking about melodies singable, so we can sing melodies, and that quality implies breathing, but breathing implies pauses, and pauses imply silences, right? This is a good example of a melody where we can clearly feel that. So, of course, I'll be writing down here, we have the tonic arpeggio. But at the same time, if we look closer, this melody has these pauses, and there is a pause right after each of these half notes. That allows us to breathe. So if we're singing this la 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 la, right? And you might be wondering, of course, this is an instrumental piece, but the actual melody stops there. This is a filler, right? So the melody has another pause there. We have this first idea, and then we have two more ideas, right? And finally, right. So this kind of provides us a little bit this concept of silence or pause that I really like to explore, and I think that is essential to music. And good melodies do have these. Of course, you might find melodies that are very intense and moving, but even within those melodies, like in this case, we can see this. It seems like it's moving all the time, but it's clear that that's the end, and then we have this filler. Right. And the third ingredient that these videos and, of course, ChatGPT in this case, what we're missing is the whole concept of how melodies are structured. Usually, there are only two main ways of structuring melodies. 99% of good melodies fall into these two categories. So we can have either a sentence or a period, right? And the way that I like to explain them is through the concept of opening and closing ideas. So I'll be giving here a quick definition of that. If we're having a sentence, and here we're having a period, there's a big difference between the way to organize them. So in a sentence, we have an opening idea that is followed by an opening idea, and that is answered by a closing idea plus closing idea. So that means that we have basically this question and answer, antecedent and consequent structure. Whereas in the period, we have an opening idea that is followed by a closing idea. And then the opening idea is again followed by a closing idea. That makes that you have like this feeling of repetition of the first statement. And that repetition first is open. So the first statement is open, this first time, and then the second time is close. What I like also to call these is dominant. You have the 5 there, and this is tonic. So all of the melodies we'll be looking at today are either a sentence or a period. And the logic that gives these melodies, the logic that's underneath this is that the fact that we're reusing these melodies, the materials, the motifs, in one way or another provides a lot of logic and coherence to the music itself. Now, we might be looking at this and wondering, what am I seeing? Am I seeing a period? Am I seeing a sentence? Well, the short answer is I'm seeing a period. Now, you might be wondering, where? Well, let's have a look. So, the first thing that we have is we'll be using this time red to define what is the opening idea and blue for the closing idea. So these are the two main ideas that are in Bach's piece. We have the opening idea, and all it does is just moves from tonic to second degree, and it goes to the dominant, and it does have that upward motion that everyone was talking about, and it's a really good one, so we can see how the melody is ascending. And then we have a descending motion. And really, this concept of ascent and descent is that essential concept of music composition where we find balance between one idea and its opposite. If we have always music that's going upwards, then we get tired of the effect and we want to have that resolution. And clearly in this example, Bach is showing us how to find a good balance between these two motions. And even within the melody itself, you can see that inner materials are also providing contrast with these descents and ascents, right? And that is creating a very interesting fabric at different layers. So that's going to be our opening idea. And this is going to be the closing idea. And as you can see, Bach is clearly articulating them with these pauses. So what we can see is that this closing idea harmonically is much more simpler. It's just a dominant that goes to the tonic. Now, I've highlighted this all with yellow because I was arguing that this is a pause, but if we are precise, we could maybe just say that those notes are the pause, and that is basically a variation of right? We can see how Bach is copying and pasting that. So that's why we'll give it the red color. Red in this case implies a repetition of the opening idea. And after that, we have the closing final statement, right? And in both cases, the idea of descending motion and ascending motion is being present again, right? So if I were to give here the colors that I was using, open sentences look like this. It's red, red, blue, blue. And periods are red and then followed by blue. Red, blue, red, blue. So that's basically the main difference between these two. All right, so here we have our first great melody analyzed. Harmonically, it's the same both times. So we have the opening idea and closing idea with tonic to dominant, dominant to tonic, and once more tonic to dominant and dominant to tonic. Bach is also doing something at a much deeper level of analysis, and is this concept of symmetry. So Bach is symmetrically mimicking the rhythms of opening and closing idea in the second sentence, in the second phrase. So the first phrase is here, phrase 1, and the second phrase is there, phrase 2. And what Bach is doing is using phrase 1 with quarter notes, whereas the closing idea is using primarily eighth notes. And if we're looking at what happens in the second phrase, it's just the opposite. So first we start with the eighth notes, and then we're doing the quarters. And that actually is explaining how this melody was thought, because obviously if we are trying to build something that has some sort of directional logic, we start with two concepts. Either it's static, like this, it doesn't have much motion, or it's dynamic and it's moving. And Bach basically continues with that dynamic motion until he culminates there and resolves this with the opening one. So we can see the symmetry. The opening idea becomes the closing idea in terms of rhythm, and the closing idea in the first phrase becomes the opening one. All right, I think we talked a little bit about this. We can now move to our second example. The second example is from Handel, right? We'll be still moving with Baroque music. After that, we're leaving and moving into classicism. So this is Handel's most popular melody. It became so popular that Handel himself used it in different pieces, and it was one of the most famous tunes written at the time. That gave a lot of fame and reputation to Handel as a composer, an opera composer, and also as a composer of instrumental music. So in this melody, we can see that many of the things that we were talking about apply, but also we'll be seeing a few more features that are quite interesting. So without further ado, I'll start playing it. Right, and it's being repeated afterwards. Right, I played here F, but it's actually G. Which makes it even more beautiful. Right, so this is a good example of the features that we saw. So we can start with the first one, the arpeggio. Let's see if we can find it. So Handel starts with the A, then he moves to C, and eventually he reaches the F. That gives a lot of direction to the melody. right? Actually, we're seeing that F here is passing, but the structural one is mostly featured there, or even if we want to go further, probably there with that F. So Handel is clearly moving upwards. He has that direction, raising, moving upwards. But then eventually, once he reaches the F, he is resolving it back to the low F. I'll probably structure it like this. So we have the motion ascending, overall ascending, and then descending there. Right, silences. Well, needless to say, we have plenty of them. We can see that there are pauses here, there. We're using yellow for that, so I'll be staying consistent. And I can see here this. And there are different types of pauses. So we have the ones that are mostly for rhythmic purpose, like this one, or the dotted rhythm. But also it's like sighing, so it really helps us to connect emotionally with what the words say, would say here, let my tears flow, let my soul know my heart is longing for liberty. So it's like this emotional connection is really represented by these pauses and silences. And it's almost like he is word painting the sound with the sighing effect. Right. And it's very elegant. It's raising up, so scales work absolutely fine, and it's a very beautiful line. Of course, it's not always moving up. You have some contradictory motion. Let's just moving in opposite direction, and also in the bass we can see that. So it's not all about just moving upwards, but the spirit of this ascent is creating this hope, and it's really connecting very well emotionally. And the third thing that we were talking about is whether this is a period or a phrase or a sentence. And in this case, well, we can clearly see how these two phrases are more connected, and then we can see two closing ideas that follow afterwards. So why was I saying that this melody features a couple of new concepts that we haven't spoken about? Well, the first thing that we can see in this melody, and as it's being more melodic, is the usage of passing tones and neighbor tones, right? In Bach's case, as I was not seeing, well, we didn't have the left-hand accompaniment. I was adding it, but I didn't want to invent too much. So in this case, clearly we have some harmony underneath, and we can tell what are the techniques that Handel is using to enhance the melody. And one of them, in this case, is the use of passing tones, right? So Handel is using here a passing tone, which allows to connect two notes, and also using accented passing tones, which are actually appoggiaturas. That's the appoggiatura. Right, appoggiaturas are really great. They are providing a very strong sense of tension and resolution, and it becomes a very expressive resource. Passing tones, on the other hand, help us have this direction and connection, so we avoid having skips. That would be with skips, and now we have that with passing tones, right? Passing tones are present in different places. So here we have passing tones with the E, right? Here we have another technique, which is the auxiliary tone or neighbor tone. Neighbor tones are the ones that go back to the same note. Right, you have it in Starry Night. Starry Night, no, Silent Night. Right? I'm in F major, but I'm having a neighbor tone with D. So in this case, and the final technique that we can see here is the anticipation, right? So the dominant is supposed to be G with C, E, G, B flat, G, but then we are seeing the F, which anticipates the next chord. And it gives more expression. If I were not to use it, it would still sound fine. But if you have the anticipation, it becomes much more expressive. And these techniques, the non-chord tones, passing tones, neighbor tones, auxiliary tones, anticipations, appoggiaturas, they really provide us with a very expressive field of exploration. And the fact that we have them here in the melody prove that they're very effective for achieving these effects. So we'll be focusing on that ingredient as well. Of course, I've played the second part. In this case, it's like moving to C major, and then Handel is going back to the same melody. So in theory, this is structured as ABA. And if we analyze the B part, we'll be seeing similar features. So we can see how the melody is moving upwards. Right, in this case, since Handel is doing C major, the arpeggio that I would be focusing on is the C major arpeggio. So I start with G, I have E, and I have C, right? So clearly that same rule of the 3 notes of the arpeggio still applies. And actually we can see it even faster there with the arpeggio. And in terms of notes that are used, non-chord tones, we can see this neighbor tone there. So C, B, C, another neighbor tone here. And again, an anticipation, right? So all of these techniques provide rhythmic flexibility. If you think about it, Handel is using quarter notes. He's also using eighth notes, dotted rhythms, triplets, has eighth rests, quarter rests, and even dotted eighth notes and 16th notes. All of these different rhythmic note values provide a very unique foundation for the expression of the melody. And they're not put randomly. They're not put at random. So the opening idea in this case, both times, has the same rhythmic cell. It's pam, 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 pam. And then the closing idea is providing new material. And one of the techniques that he is also presenting here is what we call emiola, right? When you're rhythmically getting this feel of 2 in the place of 3. So Handel clearly is like doing 1 2 1 2. Sorry, this doesn't belong there. 1 2 1 2, right? So we're having this division there, and it's provided with that rhythmic cell that repeats with the dot, and it's used again here, right? With the accompaniment there, it's even clearer. It sounds like 2/4. Right. What else can we say? Well, there are many things. We are not planning to do an in-depth analysis of all of these pieces. Harmonically, this one is quite beautiful. But if I were just to summarize it, because we need to go all through the 10 melodies, we can see how the melody in this case has a perfect cadence, right? So we are going from 1 to 5/1. And then in the second phrase, Handel is doing again a perfect cadence. And this proves us that, well, not always this rule of having first a question, open question, and then a closed answer applies. In this case, Handel both times is doing the conclusion on the tonic. And the only way that this justifies and makes sense is because the second musical structure that we have here, this B part, is all in the dominant. And it's all based on the C major and ends on the dominant. If Handel were to stay more or stay longer in the tonic, he would definitely become even obnoxiously repetitive, and it would reach boredom. So the fact that he is moving from the tonic is very clever. So he's staying on the tonic for 8 measures with these perfect cadences, but then the next 8 bars are this ascending sequence that moves with different chords up to the dominant there, right? And here you have a clear example of a sequence, right? And it's moving upwards with new chords. We have this. If we were to analyze it in C major now, right? It's 4 2 5. This is 5 3, which is a very beautiful chord. and 6. And eventually we have 4, 5, 1, right? I wrote here 5 because I was looking at it from F major, so it's 1 in C major and 5 in F major, right? That's the logic. And then, well, in A prime, well, there's not, that even can't be considered a prime. Well, it has a different lyric, but in reality, well, I think the lyrics are the same too. No, it's just the same repetition of the same melody. Some singers, from what I heard, they ornament and they provide some variation, melodic variation on that. But Handel really likes this melody so much that he plays it again here. And of course, then you have the repetition from the beginning, the capo fine, after this part. So we hear it multiple times. Right, let's keep moving forward. So this was a good example of a melody. We're moving to Mozart. So from Mozart, I've picked 2 melodies. I think that Mozart indeed is well known for his melodic writing. If Bach is like the father of counterpoint, it's really great at that. And in Handel too. So Handel's melodic pieces are in that numerous. But in Mozart's case, we have countless good melodies. And I've already played some. We have this Eine kleine Nachtmusik, Mozart's 40th Symphony, right from this was from The Marriage of Figaro and so forth. So we could probably just do an entire video on Mozart's melodies, but for now I'll just pick 2. So the first one will come in as his 21st piano concerto, and the second one is the Turkish March, which is a fast one. So we can see how some of the things we're seeing here not only apply to slow pieces, but also to fast ones. So Mozart melody here is extremely expressive and long. I'll start playing it and we'll be then analyzing it. There are actually 2 different versions of that. So probably I'll go directly with the piano one, because first there is a statement by the orchestra and then by the piano. So here's how it sounds. And then we have this little connector. Well, that was the time that the piano played it. Actually, I'll go and also do the first one, which is by the orchestra, because it's a longer statement. Here we have this chord. And it goes so forth. So I mean, of course, if you want to hear this in full, go to the orchestral version, and probably this melody is something that most of you have already heard and know well. Now, if we look at it, it basically features, again, all of the same ingredients that we were seeing. We have the clear example of the arpeggio, right? We have that balance of ascending and descending motion, which is really clear here, and it's approached at different levels, right? So we have it here, we're moving upwards, and then we're moving downwards. And of course, Mozart is thinking of the music as if we were singing. So we have clearly pauses, and these are Mozart pauses. And harmonically, it's not complicated. So we have tonic that moves to dominant. But what makes the melody so unique and beautiful, it's Mozart's usage of accented passing tones. So if I were to remove these, the melody would become really hollow. And I'll show you what I mean. So if I were to play this, it doesn't work. So what did I omit? I made this F sharp disappear. And the fact that we're seeing this chromatic tone, the F sharp, is the chromatic note, we're getting a great melody. And this is the new technique that we can learn from this example, and it's this presence of chromatic tones. Mozart is using several of them. He is a really great master, and he's using here G sharp. If I were to remove it, the melody would sound like this. And that's actually the type of melody that I would see a lot of the times in my students. They would try to write within the scale. So if I'm in F major, I am only allowed to do these 4 notes, but that's not the case. Good melodies usually look for these chromatic tones. In F, or if I'm in C, that's Mozart, right? All of these chromatic tones. And of course, there are multiple ways you can do that. Mozart is really known for his chromatic ascending appoggiaturas, which actually gives a very interesting color, because if I'm in C major, I'm doing this arpeggio, when I'm doing all of the chromatic notes, I'm getting B major. Right? And that expands a lot the vocabulary, the musical vocabulary that we're seeing. And in terms of the larger structure, this is a sentence, right? So I can see here this material being repeated twice. And then we're seeing the contrasting part, which is the cadence. In this case, Mozart really goes further away from the original concept and draws this extension that even leads to a second phrase. So as we were seeing with the example of Handel, we would have this A1, this would be this A2 melody, and then we'll have A1 again, right, which is here. Right. And the beautiful thing about this cadential extension is that he's reaching some very unique harmonies. Like if we just look at this chord I was playing, it's literally C, B natural, F, B flat, and A. And that's Mozart. Now, how do we make sense of that chord? Well, basically it's a diminished chord, which is common on top of a tonic. But what makes it really bizarre is that B flat, right, makes it even at the moment think that's a mistake, because but it resolves so perfectly that makes sense, right? And I think that not many people have spoken about such a dissonant chord, and probably one of the most consonant pieces that we can think of, which is a piece that just has an arpeggio as its theme. It's extremely popular. It's one of the mainstream pieces by Mozart. You can just find thousands of recordings of this online, but still it's surprising how that's a chord that we're finding there. So finding that unique harmony or that uniqueness is very important in writing good melodies. And as you can see, Mozart doesn't really get scared with exploring dissonances. He's really embracing them and trying to find a musical way to use them as balance. This is very diatonic. It has these chromatic tones, but it's mostly not modulating. It's just dominant and tonic. C major, F major. But then the fun harmony begins. We start with this. Right? First chromatic scale in the bass. Right? So that's a very good harmonic progression. But that becomes even something more obscure. We go to F minor. Right? And it's basically a standing on the dominant. So we have a pedal point on the dominant, and we're going to the F minor key, which is the parallel key. But what we're interested in finding is chromatic harmony. This chromatic harmony is a perfect balance for the diatonic that we were seeing previously. And it's also what resolves afterwards. That chromaticism resolves into a period that's doing a very clear example of a perfect cadence, right? And even in this case, I still want to highlight the beautiful notes which are these accented notes. We can see the C sharp in the bass, which doesn't belong in theory to the key of F major, and even the F sharp. So what are these? In the first case, it's this beautiful example of how you move from dominant to the 6th degree. So it's an interrupted cadence like that. And we're moving through the dominant of the 6th degree, right? I didn't write it properly. So it's the dominant of the 6th and the 6th. And in the second case, it's just this neighbor tone. It's a chromatic neighbor tone, like a turn, right? So the second phrase that we're seeing here, it's clearly a good example of a period. We have da, da, dee, da, dee, da, dee, da, da. That's the opening idea, and then da, 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 closing idea. And then in second time, we can see da, dee, da, dee, da, dee, da, and closing idea. Dee, da, dee, da, da. And that provides a very straightforward, clean period that's shorter, of course, than the previous one that we were seeing here, this longer sentence, and really resolves and clarifies all of that chromatic harmony that we were seeing. Now, what Mozart does next is he's doing the same structure that in A, but instead of doing that complex standing on the dominant, he just does a perfect 5-1. So, new lessons that we have in this example that were included is this usage of chromatic tones. It's the thinking of balance between diatonic and chromatic progressions. And it's the experimentation with new sonorities, like that one, right? Let's keep moving. So, we have now a fast piece. This is Mozart's Alla Turca. Alla Turca, which is the final movement of his A major sonata. It's probably one of the most well-known piano pieces and most played. A lot of people play it really fast. It says allegretto, so I'll stick to that tempo indication. And there are different ways you can play it. The mainstream one is to do the 16ths. You can also do it with that type of mordent. I'll stick to the 16th notes because I prefer that one. right? And after that we have a second theme. And the main theme again. Right, so this is a very popular tune. Probably I didn't even have to play it, you know it. But it's a great example also of a period construction. So we can see how we've got the opening idea that's repeated there, and then we have a closing idea that's contrasting, and it's provided right afterwards. So these two, in this case, also are characterized by direction. You can see how Mozart is clearly just moving upwards in the first phrase, and then the second one, it's moving downwards. Let's highlight that, right? So that balance of those directions is really good. Of course, we have silences, so even in a fast piece, like in this case, the Alla Turca, Mozart is doing these pauses. We have them there, and even I was missing one there. So that's the main motive. That's reused, but it's always articulated with pauses. What makes it really singable? So you can have la 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 la. The range is really wide, so it's moving from A to C. It's larger than an octave, but still it's manageable, and that's partly what makes it really memorable. Harmonically, if we look at it, it's extremely straightforward. So Mozart is just developing the tonic here, and then he's moving to the dominant, after which we can see that's a minor dominant that has 5 of 5 and 5. This movement is quite unusual because most of the times when we think of dominants, we would go to the major dominant. But in this case, Mozart is really going modal because he goes from A minor to E minor. Right. How would that sound if I would go to the proper dominant, which is the major dominant? It would sound like this. It has some special tone, and it actually could work, but that's much more dramatic and interesting. So that's basically what we're seeing there. And of course, this is a master class of Mozart's favorite technique, which is the chanting passing tones. Actually, it sounds like I'm playing also the Pink Panther by Henry Mancini, also a tune that's based around those neighbor tones. So we have this neighbor tone, and they're all chromatic. And with that, Mozart is really playing with A minor in G sharp minor. Right, and that sonority really gives a lot of color and interest and drama. Other neighbor tones that we see, well, these are passing tones that move with a scale. And I guess that it's needless to say that, well, this is all an arpeggio, as all melodies, all the melodies that we'll be analyzing do. And as I said, I want you to challenge me and find a good melody that doesn't have an arpeggio, or that doesn't have an extended arpeggio that I can find and analyze. It would be a really exciting discovery because in all of my years of study, I still haven't been able to find one. Right, there's a lot we can talk about this melody. It has this alternating accompaniment. First goes with 4, then it moves with 2. So Mozart really does a lot of things here. The second time that he presents it, by the way, he does a very cool chord that shows that Mozart is a great master of harmony, and he does this augmented Italian chord. So, of course, this opening looks quite basic and harmonically nothing special happens, but the second time we have that chord. which really enriches the harmony. So we have in case you're wondering what those chords are, we'll quickly write them. It's this tonic in first inversion, the second inversion, second degree in first inversion, tonic again in first inversion, second degree in first inversion, tonic in second inversion, dominant and tonic. So basically Mozart is moving a lot with 1 2 1 2. Right? And then has this perfect cadence, perfect authentic cadence. And what we're missing just in the middle is one of the most simplest and clearest examples of Mozart's technique of sequences. It could be an echo, it's repeated again, but then we have the same a third lower. Right, so clearly, if I were to analyze this, I would probably still stick to the concept that this is a period. Sorry, this is a sentence, because I have twice this opening idea and then it's repeated a third lower. Beautifully, the motion that's happening inside of this is contrary motion. So Mozart is showing us and reminding us that he knows the counterpoint rules and tries to abide by them when writing these short details. Harmonically, nothing really big happens. It's just 5-1, 5-1, first in C major and then in A minor. So we have C major with 1 and 5. And then we've got A minor with 1 and 5. This time is the proper dominant. So he's doing the major dominant, right? And this is again 1 and 5. And this simplicity partly is also what makes it catchy, but obviously we can see how well pauses are there, their arpeggios is really present in the music itself. Well, it's very balanced and organized, which always balance and organization make things easier to remember. Right, if we were looking at the melody here, we can see again the arpeggio. So we can see the C major arpeggio, C, E, G, right, it's there. And then we can see the A minor arpeggio, A, C, A, in there. Right, so basically all of the things that we said still apply. Let's move forward. So now we are entering into Beethoven. The example that I gave you here, it's probably one of the most iconic melodies that Beethoven wrote. Of course, Beethoven usually is not remembered that much for his melodic writing, but for his vision of form, structure, and how all of these elements combine. But I want to argue here with that vision, and there was a video of Leonard Bernstein saying that Beethoven couldn't write good melodies. I think that here we can challenge that statement, because this is probably one of the most amazing melodies that we have in all of the classical Western music, and it was written by Beethoven. So let's go ahead. And then it's so beautiful that he repeats it several times, but here an octave above. magical, and very elegant and beautiful. So it seems like it's hard to break down when music is so beautiful and argue what's going on. But we'll do it because that's our job here. So we'll try to explain what makes this a good melody. And again, the first thing that we find is the direction defined by the arpeggio. It's ascending, moving upwards. And then it's primarily still has these smaller ascents, but it's primarily descending. So we have this descent into the resolution of the tonic. The range is quite wide. It's above an octave, so we're stretching tenths in this case, but nonetheless it's still quite singable and very well written. When we're looking at the inner motion, we also can find this beautiful counter motion. So the rising patterns of the right hand are complemented with a very beautiful bass line. So it's clear that Beethoven took the time not to write just one good melody, but to write two good melodies. And the second melody is the bass melody. Right. Also, we can see the accented, these passing notes, the chromatic notes. I want to highlight them here with the purple. So the first one is this E natural, very sweet, and then this A natural. I will try to play the theme without them, and you'll notice how it immediately starts to lose part of its magic and charm. If I were to do just this, sounds okay, sounds normal, but it doesn't have that special chord. It's a dominant ninth chord that resolves to this inverted half diminished, and then very unpredictable, right? We're moving to the A natural, and that A natural, what we're always taught, is resolve it. But Beethoven, just let's resolve the A natural. It will sound like this. It loses its interest. So the beauty of this is also these augmented intervals that make the thing really unpredictable. Harmonically, we'll be commenting that, but melodically, it's very clear how Beethoven is doing a circle of fifths in this case. So you're having an F, B, E, A, D, G. So he's moving in this circle of fifths. Where he is descending fifths and raising a fourth. Up and down, up and down. And the natural thing to do would be with notes of the scale, but Beethoven does at A natural. Very, very powerful. And is not scared of this diminished fourth. So, what are the silences doing here? You might be arguing, like, I don't see any pauses. Then what you said about breathing and rest and silence is a lie. Well, of course, you might be not always seeing all of the features that we're discussing here in all melodies. And sometimes silences or pauses are filled. Like in this case, here we have a rest. That's the rest, and now we have it with a connector. So where are the resting points in this melody? Well, they're in the dotted values. If you look at it, we have and it's resting. So it's di do di da do 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 rest. da di do, da 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 do, di do 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 di do. Here there are actually different ways you can interpret the rest, but if we stick to Beethoven's original marking, they'll be there. So do 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 rest, do 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 do, di do 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 do. Beethoven is masterfully writing a beautiful melody here that, well, became timeless, and people will always remember and keep playing it throughout all of the centuries. So what is really interesting about it is also the harmony. Beethoven is not doing the conventional stuff. So you have the tonic that goes to a dominant second inversion, and then tonic and dominant. So here it's pretty much straightforward. But as we're moving forward, these are inversions, so I want to write them down. We have tonic, dominant, 6th degree, which is this interesting, right, opening gesture, and then dominant of the dominant that goes to a dominant. So that's extremely interesting. And then you have this E natural, that's the flat 9, the equivalent of F flat. And it's just to move within a dominant, which is quite unusual. I mean, I've said this is a 7th degree, it is 7th degree, and with the 7th and second and third inversion and second inversion. But then when you have the E, it's still the dominant. So all of this virtually is one dominant. But look at how Beethoven is creating with one dominant a very interesting and long passage by just prolongating that tension, and then following with the tonic, this secondary dominant, that's the dominant of the 2nd degree, which goes eventually to 2, 5, and 1. Right. What is this eventually? Is it a sentence or a period? Well, I think clearly, as we can see, there is one long statement, which is this. I'll put here the color so it doesn't overlap with the melody, which is the opening idea, and then we have the closing idea, which is the one based on the circle of fifths. So opening idea in this case is an arpeggio, and closing idea is a circle of fifths. Right, that would be like the simplification of the chord. But again, it's a beautiful example of consonance against chromaticism. Right, movement which is within one single chord, tonic, and then movement that's going in a series. And you have, of course, all sorts of passing tones. And you have also these accented appoggiatures. Right. So that would be it. I mean, this is this beautiful melody by Beethoven. Let's keep moving forward. Now we're going to be seeing only romantic composers. So as we've got still 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 to go, we'll be simplifying a little bit our analysis, it doesn't become over repetitive, and we'll be just seeing if all of these features that we were talking about confirm or not in the pieces that we're seeing. So Schubert, needless to say, is one of the most famous romantic composers of songs, Lieds in German, Lieder, and this Lied is within all of his collection of pieces probably one of the most popular ones. So I'll start by playing it. right? And then we still have a little development, but that's basically where the main melody ends. So let's have a look. In this case, Schubert is doing something very unique, and it's building a melody where the harmonic rhythm and the bass is usually very stable. I mean, if we compare it to the previous examples, in Beethoven's case, we can see that there was some movement. We had longer chords, we had faster chords, we had this very extended dominant. In Mozart, similarly, we had a prolongated chord in a very fast harmonic change and so forth. But in Schubert, the harmonic rhythm is like very stable. Every bass note is one chord, which usually is something that, I mean, I don't recommend students. I say, like, try to find a more diverse harmonic rhythm. But in this case, it becomes extremely effective. And partly it's because this first harmonic progression that we're seeing with the 1-2-5-1, it becomes almost like this ostinato. You have this. Right, that type of similar sequence, although it's being changed. So you can see that Schubert is not doing always the same 4 chords. First he presents D, B flat, G, A, then he just does D, B flat, A, D, and next just A, D. So it's varying and it's moving. It even modulates, it ends on F major in this tape. So, well, that's about the harmony, but let's focus again on melody. This is meant to be sung, and Schubert is very good at knowing the human voice. Of course, he leaves this long breathing, but taking into account the slower tempo of the piece, he gives us a little bit of time there to breathe and have an accent on that A, and then resolve it to F. So that works very effectively in this context. And next, we can see a slightly longer interval. In this case, if we were to separate the phrase, we might be breathing there. But, well, silences are definitely present and they're enhancing it. Melodically, it's very clearly a period because you have this material being used there, and the blue one, it's reused here. And actually, it has like this echo effect there. So we have the opening idea, closing idea, right? We have the same principle, opening and closing, and the closing idea has this echo. That's really, really cool, and it enhances. In this case, it's like this little comment, descending scale echo. Now, speaking of the other things that we're talking about, the arpeggio, for instance, right? So where is it located? Well, in this case, we have the A, we have the D, and for some reason, well, not for a random one, but for a good one, Schubert ends on F. If we were actually to look more structurally, the first 8 isn't that important because the melody is really having the D emphasized twice, and then you have the A. So really it's like this clean descending arpeggio. Schubert first does D, D, and then A, F. Right, and he keeps stretching it even further. The second time we have F, D, A, right? So the arpeggio is still present there. Motivically, like in all of the other cases, we were seeing that the materials that are being used to create the music are being reused. In this case, it's this type of neighbor tone, right, which is giving a lot of color, and the expansion of that interval. So the second time, Schubert could have done the same thing, but he goes, and he reaches a higher range. So that's a very interesting thing to draw your attention to. In terms of motion, we can see that we have these ascending directions, but at the same time, the overall hierarchy here, it's that gesture of descent. We're moving downwards, 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 and leading into the different notes in the melody, right? So this is what we have in Schubert's first theme. There is a second theme here, which is this. Right? And that theme is repeated there. So what is it about? Well, it's a period this time. So in this case, we can see, like in the first phrase, an opening statement, which is repeated here, and then the closing idea. And if the first time this was done with the piano repeating, in this second case, the closing is repeated with the singing. So the singing is basically doing it twice. So we have this opening idea to closing, opening to closing. That makes a slightly longer phrase of 12, which is also a very interesting thing to examine. Probably that asymmetrical distribution also made the melody more memorable. I could play this melody without those echoes and those repetitions, and you'll immediately start to see that it becomes slightly too direct. So if I were to play it without the echo, it sounds like this. Still sounds good. But it sounds a little bit too direct. It doesn't have that pause for thinking or commenting. So the usage here of silence, the pink silence that I'm highlighting here, is really enhancing that. So these silences are really good. And now in this case, we can see also a lot of chromatic tones. The same ones that we were seeing in Mozart. Right, so I can highlight them here. That will be with pink. And also we can see some mode change. He goes from D minor to D major, right? And even in this fourth degree, in G major, we have the A sharp, which really gives an interesting color in. So all of these are color tones, chromatic neighbor tones that we were seeing in Mozart being used a lot. And that's basically it. So it's a great melody, and it features, again, all of the things that we were seeing. It has another small ingredient that I'd like to mention. It's this usage of 3 against 2. So we didn't see that much in the previous pieces, but here Schubert clearly is doing, that's 3 and 2. That gives a lot of flexibility, rhythmic flexibility. If we were to remove it, I could do this maybe. You clearly see that it loses a lot of its melodic expressivity in that connection that we have. And probably as more we move more into especially in Chopin, we'll be seeing that the flexibility in the melody, it's one of the main characters and features. So that's going to be like the overall overview of Schubert. Just in case, I'll just briefly highlight the harmony because I think it's important. You have this closing idea. So first it does a perfect cadence, so it's closure, tonic. Then the second time it opens the same way with tonic. We have this second degree in third inversion with the seventh. And this time we go in F major, right? So that half diminished chord before was a pivot chord. We're going with dominant seventh, 5 to 1. That's a perfect authentic cadence. And that's closure, but it's modulating. So it's an interesting idea. Then you have 5 that goes to 1, right? So this is restatement. Then you have 4 going to 1, in this case from F major, right? It's a plagal cadence. And it's just to do 4, 1, 5, 1 in F major. And after that, Schubert is doing the last one, which goes to D major, right? So he goes from 5, here it becomes major, 1, 4, 1, 5, 1. That's the overall concept. So it's all around these very diatonic chords. We don't see too many secondary dominants, but there is, even within that diatonic motion, 3 keys that are being used. So we have D minor, we have F major, and D major. And that's quite remarkable. It makes it sound very special and interesting. So, next example. We're moving forward. We're now having Paganini. Paganini, of course, is very well known, not for his melodies, but for his virtuosic pieces and for his arpeggios and techniques, extended techniques on the violin. But there are 2 melodies that he wrote that became timeless and so many composers reused. One of them is this 24th Caprice, which was used by composers such as Brahms, and also we have Rachmaninoff with an extremely beautiful Rhapsody, a masterpiece of composition. But also you have the Campanella, which was very famously featured by Liszt in his etudes. So let's focus on this theme. Again, we won't be commenting all of the variations because there are so many. We'll just focus on the measures, the 12 bars, I think, that make the theme. And the first thing that we notice is that, well, there is no harmony, so I'll have to add it. It's implied. So we're in A minor, it's 1 to 5. 1 to 5, that's just the tonic and the dominant. And then we have some secondary dominants that do a circle of fifths. Dominant of the dominant that goes to the 4th, then dominant of the 3rd that goes to the 3rd degree. That continues with the dominant, or the, in this case, that should be the dominant of the 2nd, but it's not, it's just 7th degree that goes to a tonic. We have an augmented 6th, which is a very interesting feature here. And that goes to a dominant 7th in a tonic. So I'll play the theme already with the harmony that I wrote, so we can hear a little bit of more harmonic context. Right. Needless to say, it's a very popular tune. Probably you've heard it in one way or another. And let's try to see why it's memorable. So, does it have pauses? Does it have silences? Does it breathe? That's the first question. Well, even in such a virtuosic piece like this, the answer is positive. Yes, it does. We have silences here. We have rhythmic silences that are shorter ones like that are present in different levels. But most prominently, of course, we have the longer pauses, the 8th note rest there. Right? It's interesting because Paganini could have written the dotted note. And there is no actual need in the violin to breathe. I mean, you can technically just keep playing in onwards and onwards. But even in the variations that he is pausing, and he's clearly doing that in all of these different versions. So even in something as fast as that. But well, as we said, we won't go into the variations. So that first thing of silences is used. We can see it. Is the arpeggio present? Of course it is. So we can see it. Does it have direction? Of course it does. So we have the ascending motion that goes here, and it's counter-rested and or balanced with this type of descending leap. So again, here it's this very descending phrase. It's all moving downwards, and eventually it reaches that tonic. So in reality, if we were to highlight these notes, we could clearly connect the dots and have A, G, then F, E, and from E, we're reaching back to the tonic. So that's going to be like a little bit the pathway if we were to do the harmonic analysis, the melodic Schenkerian reduction, right? And then, and well, needless to say is that this is a circle of fifths. If you want to see it with the main notes, I could highlight them here with orange. So that's going to be this A goes to D, G goes to C, F goes to B, E goes to A, and so forth. And then we have this D. So it's right, whereas the first phrase is just an arpeggio. In a way, this is extremely closely related to Beethoven's Pathétique Sonata. Pathétique has the arpeggio, and then here we have the arpeggio and circle of fifths. Right, so that's something. I mean, of course, we're not saying the main thing, but it's clearly here that the rhythmic motive of this is it's stable throughout, which makes it very catchy. So you have this ostinato rhythm, pa 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 pam pa 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 pam. Right, and well, that basically characterizes the piece. So you have a little bit of the repetition in terms of the rhythm and also of the motives, because the motif is reused there. And if you want to see a beautiful development of that motif, then go to Rachmaninoff's Rhapsody on Paganini's theme. I think it's one of the best developments of this simple idea. Of course, there are many other composers that did indeed make variations with Paganini's theme. Right, we're moving forward. So now the next example is from our beloved Frédéric Chopin, mostly known for his beautiful romantic melodies on the piano. Now it's hard to pick the best melody from Chopin, but according to his own words, one of his most favorite tunes was his Etude in E major. Right, in this case I was just undecisive, and I thought maybe I should do that, but obviously the most popular nowadays and most performed and well-known piece is his Nocturne number 2, a piece that is a very young piece. It's his Opus 9, but it's still an extremely beautiful example of an expressive romantic melody. So I'll start playing it as I did with the previous examples, and we'll just try to see all of the different features that we were seeing previously. So I could keep playing the entire Nocturne because it's so beautiful and so well written. But well, let's try to analyze it from this analytical perspective and try to understand why it's such a beautiful melody. What makes this melody great and so beautiful? And this clearly is not a melody that's easy to recall because it has so many different notes. I mean, it's all the time moving. But nonetheless, it's based according to the same principles. So if we were to spot the arpeggio, we can clearly see it within the first phrase, but also we can see it at the larger structure with this type of form. So Chopin is doing, is there. And then he's doing do, di, do, di, do, di, B flat, G, E flat. Right. So clearly this concept of working with the arpeggio is common with all the composers we saw so far, and that's not one or two. It's Bach, Handel, Mozart, Beethoven, Schubert, Paganini, and it's remarkable that this is always there. So second thing is the silences, and I do feel that this is breathing very well. You have multiple occasions for breathing, and in general it kind of develops in such a way that it's a singable melody. Now, in terms of ornamentation and all of these chromatic tones, it also features a very interesting thing, because you have some chromatic tones, like in this case, we have this B natural, right? Or the second time, it's even more prominent. You have all of these. And you might be wondering, what are they? Well, if in case of Mozart, it was always these lower neighbor tones. But in the case of Chopin, we also find these descending ones. Right, so we're playing with D flat major, moving to C. And there are more of them, so it's even sometimes like you have these combination of one step motion, half step motion between E and E flat, so both are present. And there are other elements like these trails and ornaments that really make the melody very flexible. The flexibility of this melody is so interesting because it's not written with the normal note values that you would expect usually composition students to do. So what we find is, if there is a left hand that goes in eighth notes, and I see this with so many different students, that grid of the eighth notes becomes the shortest note value that students usually think of. So if the melody is, we have this, 1, 2, 3, the melody is doing longer notes or moving with the subdivision. But in this case, Chopin is clearly teaching us that, well, there are different ways that you can go beyond the grid. And one of them is with 16th notes, with these ornaments, again, 16th notes, with trills, with grace notes, right? And all of these are perfect examples on how to go beyond the subdivision. And the other resource that we can see here is the suspension. So you have this G that is still carrying, and then the F appears in the second beat. What would happen if we wouldn't have that? Well, it would sound like this. It still sounds good because the harmony is beautifully written, but it's way more conventional. In some of the things that make melodies unique and memorable and good, it's that awkwardness that is achieved by some sort of rhythmic displacement. And in this case, that's a perfect example of it. Then there's a rhythmic motive that Chopin is reusing, is this. So it's long with that dotted note. We can see that in different places here too. But all in all, what characterizes this melody is really the flexibility and that balance between steps and skips. So we can clearly see, well, descending motion, that's very prominent here, and we can see ascending motion in that direction. But the interesting thing is also the leaps that are at the opening. It's a 6, a very expressive leap. And then you don't have more leaps. He doesn't do this melody. That could have been a possible melody, but that's not the case. What we have is and steps, then again leaps, and steps, leaps, step, a little leap, and a big skip. And then it connects. So it's always this little balance between conjunct and disjunct motion. Right? And structurally, according to the two main forms of musical organization, here we can see the opening idea that's being repeated there with a variation. And then we can see the closing idea, which is played here with its variation. So it's just 8 measures of music. And when you have this structure is what we call period, right? We've got the opening that in this case goes to the dominant and it closes then in tonic. And then we've got again a restatement of that going here into the tonic. Right, harmonically this is much more interesting and beautiful to comment because it's got different chords. Some of the chord progressions actually remind us of Mozart. So you have this chromatic bass line, right? And I could show you how, well, in Mozart we're seeing here, right? So that interestingly is it's a very similar pitches at the same time that we have here in the bass line. So it's this. More things that actually make it romantic is, of course, the main one. It's this flat 6. So flat 6 in a major scale, it's the equivalent of a nostalgia emotion or a nostalgic feel. If I'm having E flat major and I want to sound more romantic and not so classical, I would have to have the flat 6. And Chopin knew this very well and does it in the first measure. This is the tonic, and then you have the flat 6. How would that sound without it? It would sound fine. It sounds really bright. Right? But Chopin clearly wants the nostalgic. Whereas the dominant 7th, quite similar in sonority, but clearly the C flat has more flavor and gives us a very different sound. Now, these are secondary dominants, right? You have an E natural, so let's analyze it. Harmonically, we have tonic. This chord is the diminished 7th chord on top of the tonic. Then you have tonic. It's here tonic major 7th with the inversion. So in this case, the 4th inversion, the D is in the bass. Now we have a dominant of the sixth degree, which is quite common. This is very common in Beethoven. You have and you might be wondering, where did we see that? Well, we saw it in Pathétique. Right, so in a way, Chopin is being influenced in a good sense from Beethoven and Mozart, and reusing some of the harmonic techniques we were seeing both in the Pathétique and both in the 21st Piano Concerto. Right, this is the sixth degree with, it has first the diminished chord on top of it. So he is doing again the same diminished seventh chord on sixth, and then he is doing the sixth degree. That leads us to dominant, and this is exactly the same thing that we were seeing in Mozart. So it's dominant that goes where? To the interrupted cadence, 5 to 6, but achieved for 5, dominant of 6, and then 6. So that's the way to go. Interrupted cadence with this secondary dominant, and then you have the diminished seventh chord, in this case again, but this is of the dominant, and the final statement is just the dominant, where we have a sus4, and then we have the dominant seventh. So dominant seventh sus4 has this suspension, and then you have resolution into E major. Right, where did we see this? I'll just quickly show you the example. We were seeing it here. Right, and that's the same as, right, identical sonority in terms of harmony. Good. And what makes it really interesting is that the opening idea, and we'll be seeing that in Chopin in future videos when we analyze his mazurkas, for instance, is that he was a master of ornamentation. And this ornamentation most likely came from his piano playing and improvisation. So the second time he does this, and all of the ensuing occasions, it's a different ornamentation. And that difference, that's with flexibility changing the motifs and making them unique each time, is what makes the melody sound less repetitive, more interesting, and keep the listener engaged with the melody and the emotional content of that. So this was Chopin. Let's keep moving forward. We've got 4 more to go. Next one is Mendelssohn, right? Of course, I've picked one that one of the melodies by Mendelssohn that's mostly overplayed and very popular. Mendelssohn has great romantic melodies as well, like his violin concerto. Right, which is a masterful composition in terms of the classical techniques of early romanticism and so forth. But in this case, what we're seeing is a melody that's so well written that people are actually willing to get married with this tune in the background, or it's being played very, very commonly. And what is so interesting about it is that it starts with, in spite of being in C major, you have this, right, the trumpet sounding. And if well, here I could already in this element show you that there is the arpeggio and there are the pauses. So it's the introduction itself is speaking with the concepts we've been discussing. But the interesting thing is that it doesn't start in C major. So you would think if I have this, I would have this. But it starts on a diminished, and not any diminished chord, but a diminished chord that is not, it's not even fully diminished, half diminished, and it's not in C major, it's in E minor. So what can we learn about it? Well, it's very unique. I mean, in terms of sonority, of course, since it's been overplayed, it's a little bit underestimated, the beautifully complex writing that we have here. But if we look at it just from the structural perspective, we can clearly see that it's a period. It's a very good example of a period structure where we have an opening idea and a closing idea. But the opening idea, interestingly, it's not in the key of C major, it's in E minor. And that's very unique. And all it does, it's 2 with the 7th. You have dominant 7th and then 1, right? Which afterwards leads into C major, which starts here, C major. And the C major key is doing 2, 5, 1. You have this 2, 5, and 1. Quite straightforward. So 2, 5, 1, 2, 5, 1. But the first time in E minor, and then in C major. And how is this possible? Well, it's possible because E minor isn't know that it's being shared by C major, and C major is also a 6th degree of E minor, so they are connected, and you can have this mediant modulation, in this case even chromatically, right? So the chromaticism is implicit, and the arpeggio is present here. So if you look at it, it starts with C, goes to G, that's back to C, and E. So you have here the main arpeggio, but if you want to connect it there, that's the outline of the melody. And in terms of direction, it's having the opposite. So it's interesting because most of the melodies we've been analyzing always are characterized by this ascending motion, and this, which is considered to be actually a wedding march, something positive, well, it has this descending line, and has this type of dramatic harmony that's very unpredictable and unexpected, which kind of a little bit contrasts with Wagner's wedding march, which is also played a lot, which doesn't have that opening with such a dissonant chord, right? What can we say about the other features? Well, does it breathe? It does. I mean, this is a filler, so the pause is supposed to happen here. And the other thing that we were overviewing is the different type of motifs that it has. And here the motive has this type of leap of a third that's followed by a second. Second, third second. So it can be split into these different elements. But rhythmically, again, it's extremely diverse. Just look at it. Mendelssohn starts with triplets, but then he moves to half note, dotted rhythm, quarter notes, trail with a run, and then a dotted eighth note that has a 16th. So it's extremely diverse and moving, which creates this unique sense of strength and heroic feel, right? So that's this majestic wedding march. I mean, it has a second theme here, which is this. And that goes back to the same. But this middle theme probably it's much more stable and coherent in terms of what we would expect a joyful melody to be. The other one, it's extremely breaking and unique. And probably because of that E minor to C major harmony, Mendelssohn's Wedding March became so popular. If it were to be something much more conventional, it would sound very similar to a lot of other music that was written. But there aren't that many themes that start with half diminished of the third degree and then resolve into a major. And doing this so seamlessly, like Mendelssohn does, is a real craft of mastery. Like what we have afterwards, which is just this 1 in 5, doesn't have anything really special. But even with this type of relatively straightforward and even slightly simplistic writing of 1 in 5, Mendelssohn is still keeping the good manners of counterpoint. So he is making sure that whenever you have a descending motion like that, the other hand is doing the ascending one. So you can see this complementary direction. And even though this is like very repetitive, it has a tonic and dominant, still Mendelssohn is playing with the concept of the arpeggio. Just see how boring it would sound if I would just get stuck on this C and E. It would sound very ineffective, but Mendelssohn is clearly going to the G and doing the full arpeggio, C, E, G. And that the G sounds glorious, and it's achieved with a quite advanced chord. Mendelssohn is doing an F major ninth chord, not so common in the time, right? And it greatly contrasts with this just tritone, this triadic harmony with just tonic and dominant, right? It's very static. There we go. And we'll reach this F major 7th. And after that, quite advanced in classical motion, which is this 2nd degree that becomes dominant of the dominant and then goes to the dominant, right? It's actually in 7th and 1st inversion. So this is what we're seeing. And in this case, the same thing. Right, so what else about this theme? Well, if we were to write this again, probably we would miss some of these things, but notice how the rhythm has first just dotted rhythms that are with 8th notes, but then we have double dotted rhythms, which sounds really strong and emphatic. And that emphasis is really what brings this variation, right? So the second statement, the second repetition of that, and by the way, this is a sentence, right? So we have this being repeated here. The second time it's repeated with a new feel, a new air, and a new fresh vision. So that repetition has these added dotted rhythms, has this added melody. Right? The bass is also doing the arpeggio, right? It's moving around. And the third statement, it's magnificent. You have this wide, very wide opening. Melody clearly going upwards and the bass completely descending from a very high C down to the bottom F. And then we're reaching that F. So that diatonic motion eventually, which is all present here, is contrasted with chromatic notes. And the chromaticism, same as in Mozart, is characterized by these passing tones. Right. Well, this gives Mendelssohn to do the repetition of the theme again. And notice how the second time is different. And it's much wider. It still has this contra motion, but Mendelssohn is trying to do a different statement of the theme. Right, so here we had something much more amusing, like a much more uplifting and fast piece. Let's keep moving, and the Romanticism, of course, some of the greatest melodies were written by opera composers. That's why the next two examples will come from opera composers. We'll have Verdi and Wagner. So the first composer here, Verdi, presents us with probably the most famous tune that we can find in classical music, and it's been played in different variations. There are many compositions based around it, and this is how it sounds. It has the introduction, and then we have this little pause, right? So let's analyze the actual theme. I'll start with where it begins. I think I've got it, I've lost my place because the score moved down. Yeah, it's here. And then we have this. And the introduction repeats. So let's try to dissect it. The first thing that, of course, makes this very danceable and rhythmic is this waltz. And now I'm just thinking of probably there are many themes that we excluded in this overview of great melodies. So maybe we'll do a second part depending on how this one is received. But for that, I'd like to hear from you. What are some of the great melodies that you think that are good melodies, so we can try to understand why they work. In the case of waltzes, I immediately thought, while playing this, about the famous waltz, the Blue Danube, which is also a great melody that we can analyze in another edition. So let's focus on this. Verdi is clearly having a joyful feel, which is featured by a melody that is having a very characteristic motive. This motive actually is similar to the one we find in Mozart's F major sonata. So it's not an original motif, but what Verdi does with this, it's quite original and quite unique. So the first way that he deals with this is through a sequence, right? We have the melody stated here, and then, well, it's presented a second below, right? And in doing so, the harmony just shifts. So here we have tonic that goes to dominant, and then we have dominant that goes to tonic. This should be in caps. So this is a second below. We have just the fact that you have a cell repeated twice a second below makes the theme very memorable, and it immediately makes it very recognizable. But Verdi cleverly is using again and continuing with that technique. And the next two phrases that you see, the next two little ideas, the closing ideas, are based around the same. So there, a descending idea where I have the original module, and then I have a second below, and harmonically I'm having again tonic, go into dominant, and dominant, go into tonic. Now, after that, which is like the first phrase, which is at the same time a sentence, Verdi is trying to repeat it. So we have and the repetition is identical, right? So what makes it more memorable in this case is actually the melodic content, the lyrics. But in terms of writing, it's extremely simplistic and very straightforward. As Verdi was a great opera composer, he knew where to place his pauses and rests, and they're actually pauses and rests happening every two measures. So you can see how that's repeated. So technically, here we're seeing an 8-measure sentence, and when we combine these two, it's a 16-measure period, right? Because after that, again, the red motif comes again. So we can see it here. This is the red one, repeated, and then we have the blue. So whenever we have this red, blue, it's the period, right? That's the thing. Now, does it have a arpeggio? Well, see it yourself. So I'm doing D sharp, F sharp, and B. Well, not me. Verdi is doing these three notes, right? And in the second phrase, which is this cadential one, is again doing the very same arpeggio. Now it's downwards. What this provides him with is direction. So the melody is clearly having this beautiful balance of descending and ascending motion. The first phrase is really characterized by this repeated note, so static motion, very common in singing, and then ascent that's answered by another third. So the inner motive is made of these thirds, and then the cadential part is made of scales. Right? You still have there a little third, but mostly it's this scale. So we've got thirds answered by scales. But what makes this melody so unique, of course, it's not just that opening, which is very catchy, but it's also the continuation. So if all of this was descending, mostly down, we have this descending arpeggio, the motion is down. The only thing that moves up is just this little third. In the second phrase, the motion clearly just points upwards, 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 until we reach this climactic G, where the accompaniment actually stops. So it's... right? And it reaches a very interesting chord, because I'm just playing B, G sharp minor, right? And we're in B major, so it's a 6th degree. And that's repeated again. And then we have... So let's analyze this part. It's ascending motion, chromatic scale. Sounds familiar? Yes, we saw it in Chopin, we saw it in Mozart. It's right, a very distinct and ascending motion. In this case, it's accompanied by both melody and the bass. Of course, it's not all ascending. You still have these little leaps or skips, like in the same nature that we were seeing overall a descending motion there, but there were some ascending thirds. But harmonically, it's all based around the same concept. Dominant of the dominant, it goes to a dominant. In this case, dominant of the sixth goes to the sixth. And then we're having just an interrupted cadence, dominant that's supposed to go to the dominant, but it goes to the sixth. And that eventually leads us to a 2-5-1 situation where we have a perfect cadence. So whenever you can see 6-2-5-1, right, which is a little bit what we're seeing here, it's a circle of fifths, right? So it's this G minor, C sharp, F, B. I could highlight it here, G, C, F, B, right? A descending progression, right? Answer like that. Of course, what makes this so unique and so memorable and catchy is that contrast. You have something that's very diatonic, same as in Mozart's. Right? And then we have the chromatic ascent. Here is the same situation. You have tonic, dominant, tonic, and then tonic, dominant, and then in the second part, chromatic scale. Verdi was really heavily influenced by Mozart in this case, both in harmony and both in melody. Remember that that motive is by Mozart. It's his F major sonata. Right. So what follows afterwards, and this is actually the place I struggle with because I'm trying to read at the same time different parts, and it's not just a piano score, but here we have this. Right, you have a couple of double notes, but harmonically it's not complicated. So what we see is once we have this cadential gesture, right? So let's analyze this again now with our color. So that's opening idea, and then what we have is closing idea, right? All of that is this closing idea. So what we see is a repetition of it, right? It's being repeated and extended 3 times. And that extension probably, it became very, very popular because of this crescendo effect that you have with 5, right? And it resolves eventually to this 1, 2, 5, 1 with a descending scale, right? That's the motion that we have there. So really it's like doing 3 times the same cadence. And then you have this. And third time, 3 cadences, right? Each of which is slightly different. So clearly the second one is less intense, it's just shorter. We start with E, and the last one is the highest one that reaches this A, which is the highest note in the melody. And it's achieved by sustaining that long tension and resolving it. So that's a very operatic writing that really sounds good on singing in an opera. And the silences are there, right? You can see these pauses that make the melody breathe. And probably this is like the most complex line to sing that you have to do in one single breathing. Some might actually breathe here, but if you want to reach that high A with strength. So harmonically it's just 5-1 to 5-1, 5-1, 5-1, all very straightforward. Right, so why did this melody become popular? Well, it's of course part of an opera, and it features all of the techniques that we were seeing in the good melodies, right? And at the same time, it's even catchier because it has a rhythm that's danceable, which is the waltz rhythm, and it has a melody that's very repetitive. You have these repetitions that are a sequence. Right? It's just a sequence that's moving downwards and then ascending upwards, also in a sequence. You would expect this to go to B, but it's higher than the range, so it goes to G. then it resolves. All right, so there we had Verdi. Let's look at a slightly different conception of melodies, and this is going to be Wagner, right? So we're approaching the end of this overview. We have Wagner with Tannhäuser. In this case, we're just looking at the overture. It's a very long melody, so probably we won't be doing all of it. We'll stop here, because then we have this next phrase, which is quite chromatic, and it resolves very well into the beginning. But I'll try to play a little bit of this, so we get to have the feeling of Wagner's Tannhäuser. I will stop there because it's challenging to play, but also it's the recapitulation of the same opening theme with these added runs. Of course, I have to apologize here for misplaying that D sharp into D. So it's supposed to be sound like this. Right. But well, it's clearly a fabulous melody that's very extensive, very long, characterized of this concept that Wagner had of this infinite melody, right? If we go and look into it from the analytical point of view, the concept of the arpeggio becomes manifest at the opening, but it's very interestingly harmonized, right? So it moves from tonic to dominant, which I really like, to the sixth degree, right? So it's a very modernistic sound instead of going to the dominant like this. Right, that would be a very straightforward harmony, but Wagner does this. a very deep melody. Now, the next thing that we can see is that the melody is really supported well by a bass line. In this case, mostly by parallel motion, but it reaches this point. So let's first see the features that we can find according to the structures of the melodies. In this case, this is a period, a very good example of a period that ends there. So we have opening idea, closing idea. Each of which they breathe, so they have these pauses, cadential pauses. You can see them in the bass. Then this is a sequence. So it's taken further. Ends here. Sorry, so that was supposed to go there. Right, that's the first phrase. So I'll be distinguishing it here with this bar line. Now the second phrase that we have, it's this. And here Wagner is doing not a period but a sentence. So we have that, restate it again, and after it, just what follows is this cadential idea. So opening idea is followed by the closing. So first it's a period of 8 measures, and then we have a sentence of 8 measures too. What's the difference between these two? Well, the first one is much more diatonic partially, and this one has more chromaticism, and it actually indeed modulates to the dominant. So in spite of, in both cases it ends on 5, right? But the first time when we end on this chord, it's still, we're in E major. But this time, it sounds like we already moved to a different place and we moved to B major. But the really chromatic melody, and I first said that I wouldn't be analyzing it, but it's impossible to make sense of the first melody without it, is this. So this is a very chromatic harmony. I mean, it would take us a lot of time to unfold all of it. Of course, we'll do a little quick analysis of it, but what you have here is right. So that already sounds like we are seeing a sentence because that's the opening idea. Da, 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 repeated twice. And what follows is a closing idea, which is here. Goes up to there. And after that, Wagner is doing one more time this sentence. So we have that rising motion and then ending there on the dominant. The fact that we are always ending on the dominant, and then there's this little connector, this is an interlude that eventually leads to the main theme again. So this little concept is that always the themes end on the dominant. And we, of course, know this to be true in one of his most famous pieces, one of his most famous harmonic dominants, which is Tristan und Isolde. And the entire piece is always like hanging on these dominants, right? And in this case, each time that we hear the dominant, it's through a different harmonic combination. So that makes it very, very unique. But as you can see, it's very neatly organized. So it's always every 2 measures something happens, and every 2 bars you're seeing something different, and it's either this period that we're seeing at the opening or these sentences that are following, which get more chromatic. Right, breath marks, as we said, are here present, so every 2 units we're breathing. The harmony is extremely unique and beautiful, so we can be commenting that. But firstly, let's just comment briefly the rhythm. So there is a rhythmic motive here that clearly is prevailing. It's this short, long, short, long. You have it here. It's always like this connector. But soon other elements are introduced. And this is one of them, the triplet. Then you have the dotted rhythm. And basically with these triplets and grace notes, Wagner is able to make a theme that doesn't sound like it's repeating itself. It's always moving forward, always searching somewhere. Just to show you that search, let's just focus a little bit on the opening. So the first time we have, which is very elegant. That would be like the conventional thing to do. And then you have. So what is that? Well, harmonically, we can simplify it, but let's just write all the chords. It's 1, it goes to 4, 1, 1. It's always 1 and 4, right? Basically, so we have this 1, 4, 1. But that 1, 4, 1 path leads into the second degree. And here's where we can see the suspension, right? So we have that. Or appoggiatura, right? Very expressive. But the interesting thing is that there is like this surge. So from 1 to 2, we're now moving to the major 2, which is the dominant of the dominant. So first we hear F sharp minor, but then we hear F sharp major. And that goes to the dominant. And the beauty of it is just the inversions. Look at how far we're going. We're going from the tonic root position, to a third inversion with the A in the bass. And it's clearly like a false relationship. You have the A sharp above, the A natural below, but sounds so good, so clean. And then resolves there again with a suspension. That suspension actually creates a very beautiful chord, which is this 3. That is a substitute to the 5. So you could have this 3 to 1 cadence. But here it's going to the dominant, right? And all of this is just 1, 6, 1, right? Again, a very third-based harmony. So it's based around these medians, right? The motion, as I said again, it's mostly direct, but there are some beautiful instances of contrary motion, indeed, and they're primarily here. So with that breaking of the harmony, you can see it. Also here we can see that contrary motion. So Wagner is really like taking into consideration the direction of the music and carefully trying to balance and have this equal direction. And this is a really good example of reharmonization. So firstly, we're having a more conventional approach, is dominant and 6 to 2, but then we're going to a really sweet chord. So really what makes this melody, which almost sounds like Happy Birthday, right? What really makes this 2-note melody unique and it gives it sense, it's this harmonic reharmonization. So it's a good example of this static motion. Only have 2 notes, but the chords Wagner chooses are so interesting. That we don't even perceive the repetition. It sounds like we're moving forward, we're advancing into a new ground. So it's a dominant, here it's a dominant 7th again with the 3rd inversion. And here we're going to a 6th degree, that resolves to the second. Kind of, it's a circle of fifths, that type of relationship, no, of 6 to 2. But then it keeps going with 1, in this case 7th degree, and the 7th degree is in first inversion. That goes to the 6th, and then we lead to this magic dominant of the 6th. So dominant of the 3rd, sorry. So the D sharp dominant 7th that we can see here is actually the dominant of G sharp minor. Right, and it's like we're leading to the dominant of the 3rd degree, which hasn't been really featured yet. But this chord is supposed to resolve into G sharp minor. So we would have this, and you would expect to hear, but it goes with a broken cadence. With a dominant eventually, right? Very unique, and probably what really makes this melody so great and memorable is the fact that the harmony is written at an extremely high level. It's very well thought. So what we're seeing here in E major, it's this tonic goes to the dominant, and then we're in G sharp, in C sharp minor, really, in the domain of C sharp minor with 1-5-1. But if we look closer, we can also analyze it as 6, dominant of the 6 and 6. And eventually we're leading to the dominant, right? Dominant of the dominant, and dominant. So that would be without seeing the modulation. If we look to see, we want to look at it from B major, then we're doing 2, 5, 1, right? Which is a little bit simpler to view. You have this 2, C sharp minor, F sharp, and 1. Right, if you want to see a little bit, the circle of fifths relationship is there. Right, so of course, we could keep going in the second part. It's needless to say that the harmony is like what really is standing out and making a great melody. And as it's not the purpose of this video to really analyze in depth all of the harmony, we'll simplify a little bit what's going here. So you have E minor first, then G minor, and then E flat minor, E flat minor. So Wagner is moving with thirds. We have E minor, we have then G minor, and then we have B flat minor. And that is a very far away place. If you think about it, firstly, it's minor, which is the opposite of E major. It's a minor key, but also it's a tritone away. We went from E to B flat minor. And this is achieved very smoothly through these chromatic harmonies. And then we reach E major, back to E major. So that's going to be like something that I would probably want to comment and analyze in another video. But in this one, which is about melody, we can clearly see how, well, the melody keeps rising, and then we have that descending motion. And again, yet again, this is exactly the same concept that we see in Mozart's 21st Piano Concerto. It's diatonic motion against chromatic motion. And remember that in Mozart, he was also experimenting with very bizarre ideas like that type of chords, right? And in Wagner's case, it's the concept of harmony modulation. We go really through these chromatic mediant modulations, E minor, G minor, B flat minor, and travel really far away. This is repeated 2 times. So the second time it's again E minor, G minor, B flat minor, and it reaches the dominant. So basically it's a repetition of that idea. And after that we have the interlude. So this is kind of the summary. Let's kind of go to the next one. It's Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto. So probably due to the length of the video, we'll be leaving this for the next series. And of course, I'd like to hear in the comments if you want me to analyze it, because this one is particularly dense and complex. And if that's the case, please leave it in the comments. Same as with Harmony of Wagner's piece, because we'll be trying to wrap up what we saw so far. And we could leave probably this for a second series on great melodies. Some of possible melodies that I think I could include there is Mozart's 40th Symphony. We could also talk a little bit about this Rachmaninoff Concerto. We have the famous Blue Danube by Strauss. So there are many great tunes that we've left, and we can keep analyzing. So let's go back to our first slide, which was this great melody. And I think it doesn't want me to open it. All right, so now it's opening it. Good. And here it says what makes a good melody. Right, we were seeing in the first comments that were in this video 3 tips for writing a great melody by 12 tone. We were seeing these leaps, skips, steps, right? So really all of the melodies that we were seeing were a balance of that. You have these leaps, and also there are steps, right? That happens here, it happens in Handel. Then you have a leap. Leap and then step, right? Everywhere. In Mozart, same, we have that step motion. It's balanced with leaps that are clear, beautiful circle of fifths. Right. Probably I didn't highlight that, but well, it's worth mentioning that this is a circle of fifths. And that kind of connects with Beethoven Pathétique Sonata. He is also doing that. He's doing a circle of fifths in the second part. Right. So circle of fifths usually are these leaps, and diatonic motion, scalar motion is the opposite. In Mozart's alla turca, we have first skips, then we have the step motion. Right, it's connected there. Schubert, same. We have leaps, closing idea, steps. Right, so we could keep going with all of them, but in Paganini, likewise, we have steps, skips, and then it's steps. Right, much more step motion. Chopin, the same. So that appears everywhere. Now, static motion was mostly seen in the singing pieces, so we saw it a little bit in Verdi. Phrases, questions, and answers, I think that's a little bit incomplete, so my way of viewing it, and that's the way I was explaining it always, it's through sentence and period, and I think that this model really can justify and explain 99 probably % of all of great melodies. Of course, there are a lot of good examples where that structure is extended. So you might have 2 closing ideas, like a good example was Schubert, right? So we were seeing opening, closing, and then again closing as an echo, opening, closing, and closing. But for the most, that's working the same. For the most part, it's still working as a period. So it's the same thing. Now, if we go into the second video of Haiti, in this case, I actually think that maybe the titles of the videos might be wrong, because 3 tips probably is the one by Haiti. I'll double check it afterwards. But of course, you'll have the links to these videos on the description, just in case you want to check them. So the whistle factor, I think, is present. Most of these melodies are within an octave and a half. they do have cells and motifs, right? So we were talking about a lot here in Bach. We had this beautiful contrast of symmetry. Here is also Handel is also based around these motifs. So everything is using these motifs and cells. And raising motion is also very important. So that direction of the lines, where we're highlighting it, always it's a balance of upward and descending motion. What makes a good melody by inside the scores likewise was highlighting the thing of motion. And I would like to insist again on the idea of magical formula. Like, of course, you can write a melody that has the arpeggio, has the breathing, has the rising motion, has motives, everything. And most likely your theme is going to be a good one. So if you put all of these ingredients in place, it's quite difficult to get a bad theme. It's going to work. But now, what will really make it stand out and make it a great theme, it's some magical ingredient that's really hard to define. And a lot of the times it's really connected to that emotional component that these melodies have. Each of the melodies that we looked at had a different emotional impact, like Turkish March, Beethoven, Schubert. They don't connect with this, or Paganini. They have a completely different feel. And clearly, it's the eccentric component in them that makes them unique. So they're not ordinary. There's something about them that makes them sound different. And at the same time, they're quite catchy. They're recognizable. So the secret to ingredients are most likely around that concept. And if you want to write good melodies, I usually don't advise to sit down in Sibelius or MuseScore, open the score and start writing, right? That's usually the worst thing you can do, because your creativity will be limited and will be affected directly by the medium, right? And if you think about like what Chopin did, he was really improvising. So you have two options. You can either hum or sing the melody that you'd like to write, and then analyze and see if it's missing any of these components and improve it. That could be a good pathway. So you first hum the melody, you try to improvise it on your instrument, on your piano, clarinet, violin, whatever you're playing, and then write it down and sit down and see what is missing. Maybe it's just one or two ingredients, because a lot of the times our musical intuition is helping us to provide with all of these different elements that melodies have. So remember that, of course, melodies are not just a technique, they're not a science, there's a lot behind them that's a mystery. And one of these mysteries is, well, that quality of telling stories and quality of expression. So we'll be wrapping this up and finishing the video here. If you have either recommendations of future melodies you'd like me to analyze, any piece that I've commented, things that you'd like to mention about it, do that in the comments. Also, I was asking you specifically for the question, what does good mean in a good melody? So what would mean a good melody? Is it a memorable melody? Is it a catchy melody? Is it a complex melody? What is good in terms of melodic material? I'd like to know your opinions on that. And obviously, if you'd like to study with me, or if you have any specific composition-related questions, you can write in the comments or directly to my email, which is my name and surname @gmail.com. And I'd like to wish you happy composing and a good week. So see you next time.